Hi, I'm Mike Caldwell. I'm the Director of the Business Innovation Zone. The Business Innovation Zone, or the BIZ, was created to help high-growth potential entrepreneurs and businesses in central Iowa. We provide a variety of services, including mentoring, consulting, counseling, validating business models, and help with access to funding for high-growth companies. We offer also a number of networking opportunities, including luncheons once a month and all-day seminars on subjects such as marketing and finance. You can find out more about the BIZ at www.bizci.org.
I understand that I wasn't here earlier when Mike teed all this up, but I understand that he lied to you and told you that this was going to be a really compelling presentation and that I'm a great pitch person. So let me just disabuse you right now of any of that. I think I've been pitching since I was 18, so 20 some odd years. And I'm only slightly better than when I started. So let me just warn you ahead of time. I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of presentations, if not more, lots of keynotes and things like that, not that you'll be able to tell from today. But there are some specific things that I think I've distilled out of that, having been on both sides of the table, both as somebody being pitched to as well as pitching, either for money or for customers or to analysts. And there are a number of sort of basic things that we're going to talk about, but I want to give you a little bit of runway, because when you're talking about presentations, it reminds me of, I guess, the old Roman orators that used to go to Greece and study all these different forms of oratory and how they hold their hands and how they phrase and pause in their sentences. And that's fine, and that's process and that's style, and you'll pick that up. There's some of that we're going to talk about, but you really need to get into the why you're presenting and what you're trying to accomplish. And if you do that, you'll find yourself much more effective, and you'll be accomplishing what you needed to pitch far more often than if you master the intricacies of PowerPoint. Okay? So part of this is the unpitch part. We're going to talk about the context, the type of presentation, and the audience that you're talking to, and how that affects the presentation that you're providing, or what you're going to talk about. This concept of an unpitch, the specific things, and this is Mike pretty much holds a gun to my head every year and says, make sure that you speak about the specific things that investors are expecting to see in a presentation if you are in front of a group of investors. And then I'm going to give you an example, which is Tej and I are the principals behind Startup City Des Moines, a technology incubator downtown. And I'm going to use you folks as guinea pigs for the Startup City Des Moines pitch, so you can give me feedback on that. So context. For starters, never turn your back on an audience like I just did. Depending on which type of group that you're speaking with, you're going to present different types of information. And I know that sounds awfully asinine and simple, but if you have one presentation that represents your entire company and you expect to use that with somebody who's going to write you a multi-million-dollar check, or a customer, or a group of individuals, a public here, I'm going to do Pitch and Grow at the Prometheus Awards, and is it next week? It's next week already, isn't it? I'm not doing Pitch and Grow, but if you were doing that, those are three different constituencies, therefore the message that you're going to convey is different for those three different constituencies. And in some of those cases, for example, large groups of individuals, which may or may not include investors, you have to worry, as Chris and Joe mentioned, and Rush, you have to worry about disclosure. And does that constitute an offer to buy or sell securities? So you have to be a little delicate. I've had a number of presentations that had a big disclosure form at the beginning, where it said this does not constitute an offer to sell or buy securities, sell securities, and actual mileage may vary, and force majeure, all those sorts of things. Always assume that every presentation that you give is going to be tech crunched. It's going to be public. It's going to be publicized. I've talked thousands of hours worth of smack about my competitors and local people and so forth, and it's all preserved on eternity, probably on YouTube, for people to go back and survey at their leisure and probably have little voodoo dolls with pins of me. The other thing, and there's a number of key takeaways, and I'll get you anybody who wants these copies of the slides, because I don't know, are they in the handout? Okay, good, they are. You are in your business. You live and breathe your business. You can never assume that Adam or Mike or the customers or anybody else knows 1% of what it is that you're talking about. Or, of course, you understand in my neck of the woods in voice over IP, here's how these things work. You know, understand the SIP protocol and the handshake component of authentication in SIP, and people are looking at you going, what is SIP? What is voice over IP? Are you talking about phones now? Just assume that the people on the other side of the table are your elderly grandparents and have no context whatsoever for what you're doing. We're going to get into a little bit of how you can avoid not insulting somebody's intelligence if it turns out that you're on the opposite side of the table of, say, this is the person who wrote the standard on what I'm talking about, and I just insulted your intelligence by giving you the duckies and ponies version of it. There are ways to take a level of the room, and this is why I'm sort of a big advocate of the concept of an unpitch. So the thing I'm going to do when I do the Startup City presentation is pretty much the thing that is most abhorrent to me, which is I'm going to give you words on a slide. Linear slides to build an argument very linearly and Socratically, and I'm going to force you to take it step by step with me as I build this argument, even though you have the slides, and he's already flipping through the handout. It's okay, because that's what everybody does. And by the way, if you're in a meeting with Adam and you go in there and you give him a copy of the slides, you don't have to speak, because he's going to ignore you and read the slides anyway, as will every other VC or probably customer. But what it does is you are attempting to impose your will on the other party. But you're pitching to them, you're presenting to them, you are a supplicant in some way, you want something from them. And the best way to do that is not to force them to take information as you want it to come across. You will listen to me. This is the way it's going to happen. It's majority men in here. Has anybody ever had any success saying to your respective others, you will love me? Or you are in love with me, you just don't know it yet, or something like that. It never works. Okay? There's a reason why that never works. And it's the same thing with presentations like this. What you need to do is you need to stay more fluid and open to the dynamic of the presentation of, essentially, you're having a discussion. You're having a conversation with somebody. And slides, more often than not, get in the way of that human-to-human communication, because now you're electronically intermediating something that was already tricky as hell to begin with. And what it turns into is this, and I don't know if can everybody see the video okay? Okay. You are storming the castle with a battering ram, and you're just going to sit there and keep saying, listen to my presentation, look at my slides, stop defocusing and reading ahead on my presentation, and eventually the beauty of my wisdom, of my knowledge, will become apparent to you, which is kind of insulting. And you get people who have multiple millions of dollars on the other side of the table, it's very insulting, because they hear lots of these presentations a day or a week, and they don't want to waste the time. Can you just skip to the end part? How much do you need? I think I got it. It's this with this. How much money? Who's the team? And you can avoid a lot of the sort of confrontational animosity that you create by putting somebody on the other side of the table. When you do a PowerPoint presentation, or any sort of, this is Keynote on the Mac, you are creating an adversarial relationship, whether you like it or not. There is the people being pitched to, yourselves right now, and the person pitching. And evidently I'm trying to convince you of something, so this is a semi-adversarial relationship I've built. You want to avoid that at all costs. If there's any way at all to get through this process without getting into that interaction, do it. Because your odds of success will go much higher, because then you're just two guys over beers having a conversation about it. And it's not, I'm going to give you my presentation now, and you're going to see how brilliant I am and how well I can manipulate the clip art in PowerPoint. So I call this the unpitch, which is not having slides, or if you have slides, you have them in your back pocket, or you have a printout that you're going to hand them when you're done with the presentation. The reason for this is you can say, what would you like to talk about? What's of interest to you today? I can tell you about my company. I can tell you about our market approach and those sorts of things. Obviously, you know your content very, very well. You can articulate it in a coherent manner. If you need slides to do that, don't go talk to investors until you can do it without slides. Have a nice coherent story, have your mental model put together. Sit down, have the conversation, and then leave them with, well, here's some slides that you can breeze through, or most likely what you're going to hope for is, that sounds fascinating. Do you have a copy of your business plan and your pro forma? And then you're going to give them a document. You're not going to give them slides with some words like mine that, for the people who weren't here, that didn't hear me present, these slides are useless. They're just a couple words on a slide. They don't capture any of the context and meaning I'm trying to impart. So have that informal conversation if you can. Sometimes you'll walk into a room and you just cannot avoid that. Sand Hill Road, out in Palo Alto, where I spent a lot of time, where all the VCs are, where all the good VCs are up on Sand Hill. You walk into a room sometimes and there are people going, hey, how are you? Because they're human. Hey, how are you? And then you go, great, where's the screen? And they're like, oh, it's one of those. I have to sit here and suffer death by PowerPoint again. Fine, it's right there, there's the cord, pitch me. Or you walk in and the guy's fried because he's heard 15 presentations today in 30-minute intervals, and you're the last one standing between him and a martini or a tea time or something like that, and he's just fried and he doesn't have the energy for a conversation. So then you're going to pitch me, and at that point in time say, you know what, this doesn't seem like the right time. It looks like you're kind of worn out. Maybe we should do this at a later time, is a completely genuine thing to say, because you don't want to blow the meeting essentially it's being written off because of fatigue or bad timing or jet lag or low blood sugar, whatever it may be. So having said that, there are some times that it's unavoidable and you have to present. Given that, what you want to cover, are you a technology in search of a problem? Or is there a problem out there that you have a unique way to solve? I'm coming to, here's the problem statement. I'm going to save somebody time. I'm going to save somebody money. I'm going to make somebody some money, other than me, but I'm going to do this for the customer's benefit. Really, what's the value proposition? And more often than not, we take that as an implicit. And when we put together our slides, we go, electronic, fill in the blank, or mobile, fill in the blank, whatever it is, dating, betting, whatever. And obviously, it's apparent to you all the benefit we gain by having dating sites on our phones. Well, it may not be for the other person. I talked about, what if that's your grandparent or your great-grandparent, and they go, why would you need that? Why don't you just go to a bar or to a church or something? So really explaining that and quantifying it as much as possible, how you're uniquely solving that, and don't say I'm Google but better. Humor them with specifics, but not to the point where you're actually using a lot of jargon and trying to blow over or blow past the people on the other side of the table. Remember, you're trying to convince them of something. You're trying to get them over to your side of the fence. And the best way to do that is not by alienating them with a lot of jargon or language. Your approach, your business model, we talk, and Mike held up this business model generation book, I imagine at the beginning. If he didn't, did everybody see this at the onset? I would highly recommend that you get a copy, and there's a really good version in there there's a good chapter in there about channels. So now that you have this idea, which is fantastic, it's worth 0, by the way, in case you're wondering about valuation, because execution is actually where it's all at. How are you actually going to get that value to the individuals that need it? What's the channel to market? What's the compelling value for the individuals on the other side, the customers, to take it? And who do they take that? Who do they typically buy that through? Do they buy that directly? Do they buy that through intermediaries, associations, whom? So what's your approach? How are you going to penetrate that market? And you can say, I've got an army of 50,000 soldiers, but we're all going to run around in circles like chickens with our head cut off. Or here's how we're going to line up on the field, and here's how we're going to adapt in the event that we see the following things. And there's a big difference, and investors can see it day one. I mean, prospective investors across the table. If you say, and we're going to use contextual advertising, Google, buzzwords, SEO, blah, blah, blah. Here's our marketing budget. Usually we hear that from all technical founders. And they go, the marketing people go do their magic and we don't know how that happens. You probably want to know how that happens. And you want to be able to articulate that to the people on the other side of the table. The team, any sauce you have, financial projections. Actually, I've got slides on each of these. Let me not drill down into them on this. Secret sauce and competition. Everybody in here has got a unique idea that nobody is doing exactly, or maybe is only doing a little bit of elsewhere. To say in any room with prospective investors or customers or the general public, I don't have any competition, usually means that either A, you're trying to overinflate the value of what you're doing, and you do know that you have competition, or you're naive to the point that you don't understand that these other approaches, and usually they're a different market approach to the same problem space, are competition. They're just not approaching that market the same way you are. And if you walk into a room full of investors and you say, I'm doing mobile betting, mobile sports betting or something like that, there's only about 500 different ways to skin that cat. Nobody's doing it my way, therefore I have no competition. Yes, you do. You have 499 other approaches. And so the best thing you can do is actually over-represent in your slides. Here's what the competition is. And you'll see that actually when I do the Startup City. Not that we have competition per se, but what I did was I really cast the net widely and said, here's all the people that are doing incubator-type activity in the state, primarily just so we can properly characterize the whole ecosystem. Not that we're better than them and they suck or whatever the case. This isn't Hertz and Avis. But you really want to be able to differentiate, here's how we do what we do and why we do it different and why we believe that will be the prevailing model. So this is your chance to show off your insight into the market. Financial projections and key metrics. This goes to Adam's comment about due diligence. Being able to articulate, here's our 3-year projection, here's where we're going to spend our cash, here's where that marketing strategy that I mentioned 3 slides ago financially hits the bottom line, so you can see where the projections are. That goes a long way towards assuaging people's concerns that, you know, it's a cool idea, but I think that you can probably only write code and not run a company with my money. So I got to pass. If you come in and you demonstrate that you've got those competencies that, look, I've got domain expertise, I know the market, I know what the market needs, and we have the ability to execute on that, and I can run a company to actually make that happen, your odds have just at least tripled of actually getting money from the other side of the table. Details. I have a very good friend of mine who's brilliant, who will probably watch this video when he sees it come up on Google Alerts, who lacks the ability to spell, quite frankly. Mathematician extraordinary, cannot spell. Doesn't think it's really important because he's good at math. He's not good at spelling. There are some people who go, yeah, I'm really good at spelling and I'm not good at math, and you sort of expect the people on the other side to compensate or to forgive you your eccentricities. Assume that the person on the other side of the table is completely unforgiving and doesn't care if you're eccentric. Actually would prefer that you're not eccentric, would prefer that you're completely irrational with their money. And therefore, if you are missing zeros or formatting or there's typos all over your document, they're going to assume that you're running the company the same way. Back again to Adam's diligence point of, if I come in to do due diligence and it takes you a month to get everything together and then all your governance documents aren't signed and there's no board meeting minutes and things like that, do I really want to give you, especially as an individual investor, not a professional investor, do I really want to give you my hard-earned money? I mean, you're just going to leave it laying around on the table. Using the default slides that come with any presentation application, if that's Keynote or PowerPoint or any of those, and the clip art, it's kind of a freshman move. Just avoid it if you can. Go find a really good graphic artist to give you a logo, and then have them give you a discount for creating a set of PowerPoint slides that incorporates that color scheme and so forth. Just that little bit of money out of the gate will increase your professionalism and visibility tenfold. And like it or not, people connect, as Adam said, like with the house example, people connect with the smallest things. And if it's, I like your logo, or I like your company name, or I don't, your business could be the best business in the world, but if you have an oddball color scheme in your logo, that might be the thing that doesn't get you a second meeting. I hate to say that, but it's true. Because it's humans over there, right? It's not machines. It's not like you can give them a prescribed set of inputs and get a specific output. And then we talked about NDAs at length, so I won't belabor that one. So here's Startup City. Startup City Des Moines is an early stage technology startup in itself, but it's a startup to actually cultivate technology startups in the city to create more of an ecosystem of entrepreneurship here in the central Iowa. Historically, we've had co-working spaces, which are great for people who know what they're doing and just need a space to do it out of. Levi, if I'm not mistaken, you're at Foundry. So you got Levi who knows exactly what he wants to do and needs a space to create it in. You have other people who sort of work in exile. I don't know how many of you already work with Mike, but Mike is an accelerator without necessarily a space to do that in. So a number of you might work with Mike, get advice, and then go home back to your home offices and execute on it there. What we really have lacked, which is in the middle, which is I need constant sort of insight, like Mike's insight, accelerator, mentorship, VCs generally call it parental guidance, and I need a space to do it in, and I need other people around me because you know what, it's just me and my cat, and if it comes down to it, you know, doing that spreadsheet or playing some more Warcraft, man, you know, I'm almost at level 50. So sorry, that was total geek humor. I already hit level 50. That was last night. We don't have a space for that downtown. We don't have a space for that in central Iowa, really. We have a lot of resources educationally, but we really don't have them for business people. What happens when I get out of college? Where do I go then? Because I'm not quite ready to maybe go to a co-working space. They hand me the desk and they look at the phone and do I call somebody now? I don't necessarily know what to do. So the startup climate over the last 2 years, at least, or 3 years that I've been paying attention to it. I've lived here 8 years, but I've done business here for 3 years. Long story, I won't bore you. Has picked up considerably, and it might be confirmation bias on my part because I started looking, but we've had a lot of activity. We've had things like startup drinks, tech brew, we had startup weekends, we've had bar camps. Levi, you've been at a bunch of these. Which ones am I missing? We've had these types of events. TEDx. We've had a number of these sorts of things. And what you see is sort of the stutter start or the push start of an entrepreneurial climate getting going here. And we've had that in the past, but it's been sort of few and far between. It's like wandering through the desert and you see that other person. Or when I lived here when I was a kid, you'd be driving down the road and you waved at everybody because there were so few cars. Look, a car! Now, everybody's driving around. You don't do that anymore. And I know there's at least 2 people in this room who actually remember when you waved at other people when they drove by. But there's so many of these going on now that we're actually starting to build a sustainable culture and an ecosystem. So for example, I'd say there's probably about half the people in this room I've bumped into at multiple entrepreneurial events. I mean, just here's 2 right here. I mean, how many events have we seen each other at in the last 3 months? And it's this ongoing feedback mechanism that speeds up this development and this entrepreneurial process. And it's when you're deep in it. Has anybody in here ever taken an immersion language class? Or any sort of that? Do you remember when you went to high school Spanish or German and the teacher wouldn't let you speak any English? Remember that? So it's the same sort of thing. When you're seeped in it, all of a sudden you pick up that learning a lot quicker. A really good example is I actually asked Jeff Wood to come work for me part-time. Jeff's with Silicon Prairie News, if you don't know Jeff. And then Ben from Dwala to come over and actually bunk with me when I was the CEO over at Palisade. For no other reason than I wanted those guys around, building other companies in the same space as us, so we could bounce ideas off each other. And it worked out great. And if you ask either of those folks, now we all kind of look back on that and miss it, because there was all sorts of great creative juice flowing around. We're going to do the same thing, except we're going to do it with maybe 10 or 20 startups instead of 2. So this is, sorry, stepping out of character for a moment. This is the validation slide about, yes, the market is growing. I'm getting ahead of myself because I get so enthusiastic about it. Sorry, I get passionate about this. But this is the, oh, look, up and to the right. Everything's going up and to the right. You got your obligatory hockey stick that everybody will chuckle at. I actually have a punchline on my business cards that says, oh, 1% of the market, really? So let's talk about incubation for a moment. We talked about it just a second ago. But this is, in a market that's not quite as multi-generationally seeped in it as, say, Silicon Valley or the 128 corridor in Boston, incubation is different. Depending on where you go in different parts of the country, it's defined differently. So just real quickly from definitions. The things that startups need are pretty base. They need the right guidance. Sometimes they need money. Sometimes they need other people to bounce ideas off of. We're doing pitch and grow. We're actually doing a pre-pitch and grow session. A number of people want to get together, just bounce ideas off each other anyway. And you need education. You actually need to learn some things like you've learned in a very accelerated way today, so you don't accidentally step in a trap that was an avoidable trap to begin with. Depending on where you are in this city or in central Iowa, different pieces of that are available to you. What an incubator is getting all of the other startups or a number of the other startups around you, so you're surrounded by other people building and doing. So in the startup world, there's fail early, fail often. All that failure doesn't have to be yours. Why don't you give that a try? Oh, it didn't work for you. I'm not going to go try it and waste my money and my time because you just tried it in the office next to me or the cube next to me, and therefore I can learn from your mistakes. There's a great Goethe quote about standing on the shoulders of giants. We're going to do that with a bunch of startups, all learning from one another. We're going to apply a lot of heat. That's mentors. That's people like Mike. That's people like Tej. I have a slide on that in just a moment. You'll see that on the handouts. The mentorships themselves, or the mentors themselves, to provide the insight, and you want to have as many mentors as possible. You don't want one. Here's Christian, here's everything Christian has to offer, and it might be applicable to 1% of you. And the rest of you might think I'm completely full of it. At least you should by now. So you need to have a number of different mentors, because what Robert needs is different than what Jake needs, is different than what Adam needs as far as the type of mentoring to go in to build a startup. And then, obviously, as much education as you can squeeze into it that doesn't get in the way of actually building the startup. So you want just-in-time education. Did I miss anything? Cradle to revenue, just-in-time services. There's some other things, and we'll talk about, no, let's do it now. There are incubators all over the United States. For example, there's one in Minneapolis, there's two in Minneapolis, there's three in Baltimore. City of Baltimore has twice the population of the entire state of Iowa. They can, therefore, say, you're going to come in, you're going to take my $25,000, you're going to use my lawyers, my accountants, my marketing people, you're going to stay in here for 8 to 12 weeks, and then I'm going to kick you out, and you'll be ready to go. And other people will want to come and invest in you because you've been through our curriculum. And they're going to draw this big line around and say, nobody else shall come in. I'm going to have a beauty contest on who gets to come in. And we've actually had a couple of attempts like that here locally in the last 10 years, and they were not successful. And the primary reasons for that, if you go ask any of the people that were associated with that, and I did, was we just don't have that many people. We can't be that dictatorial about how innovation happens. Some people mature in a month, some people mature in a year. Some people really resonate with Rush, some people really resonate with Sackett. Other people really resonate with others. You need to be able to go to where you're going to get the best and most specific expertise to grow your business. And you shouldn't be restricted, especially in a population of there's maybe 400,000 working professionals, 500,000, and maybe a 50-mile radius. So we can't be that dictatorial. So this is an open model versus those closed models that you can get in bigger geographies. And that's something that's uniquely Des Moines, that's uniquely Iowan, is much more open, much less prescriptive. And then you have people, for example, you take an Adam or a Matt Kinley over at Papa John at Equity Dynamics or Dave Singpill at Farm Bureau, and if they want to invest in companies like yourselves, but maybe they don't have domain expertise in Jake's technology, whatever Jake's technology may be, they don't need to worry about, oh God, how am I going to keep my thumb and make sure that they're doing the right thing, because I just want to put the money in there and then watch it grow, but I don't have the expertise to stage manage that. They can put them in an incubator, and there's sort of a service for the community that will make sure that those guys execute, that they get the resources they need to then grow. So it's planting them in fertile soil. Unlike those walled garden incubators, there's no seed fund attached to Startup City. A lot of incubators say, you will take my money, you will give me this much equity, and you will do the following things. And it's a very linear model. You will go through the spanking machine in the following steps, and by the end of the spanking machine, you will have accomplished the following output. This is going to be captured for posterity, and I'm going to regret this at my Senate confirmation hearing. Companies are not started that way. They're not executed on that way. It's not a linear process. It is trench warfare. It is completely different every time you do it. You see serial entrepreneurs aren't good at one thing. They're good at doing about 50 different things at the same time. And when it comes time to go into combat, they're looking into the box and say, what's in the toolbox that I can use for this? You need to have that flexible model, and you need to be a flexible organization and an ecosystem to cultivate all these different types of startups. And they need to be working with each other, because there's a lot of tribal knowledge benefit from what did you learn last week, because we're going to apply it to what he's going to do next week. Walled garden, non-denominational, preferred, prescribed, talked a lot about these. A lot of people are very concerned about pitch refinement. Do I sound like an idiot like Christian did at the pitch session? How ironic. Introductions to early stage capital. Just because somebody will give you money doesn't mean you want to take it. I mean, I think you kind of said if it's green, you take it. There's money that you walk away from. There's a great site called The Funded, which was built by entrepreneurs to talk smack about VCs, and oh, that guy didn't help me, or he said he introduced me and he didn't, and all these sorts of things. And really what you want to create is an environment that's healthy for these startups to interact with one another and to build and to make mistakes. It's a little bit more like a video game and a little bit less like education, and that it's okay to get in there and screw up and mess up and correct, and just, it's like picking a lock, and you just need to sort of figure out what your approach is. Not so much, I tried, I failed, I'm done, I'm going to go scurry back to a cubicle somewhere and hide. Okay? That's ultimately what we want to create. We don't want to create that just in that space. We want to create that in central Iowa, because you need to create a culture of that. I spent 3 hours this morning with a bunch of city leaders and university leaders and corporate leaders and so forth, talking about the 5 to 10 year plan for the city. And all of them were talking about how do we encourage the big businesses to get bigger here, and then how do we encourage big businesses to put offices here. And does anybody in this room, and granted this is a hand-picked audience, but does anybody in this room think that Any of your startups could probably double or triple in size faster than they could recruit a Google data center here. Same amount of people, same amount of taxpayers, and I guarantee that you folks will be civically involved locally, and those folks will be like, hey, look, cheap labor. So I think we got a better opportunity to grow it locally than to import it. So we talked about mentors. You got people like Mike, who's already actively doing this, sort of, he's got an office, but I'll say he's sort of in exile. He doesn't have a constant space that he's doing this where everybody's working, and then, hey, Mike, can I ask you a question? Because at the end of the day, the reality is there's explicit interactions. Hey, let's schedule a time to sit down at Ritual Cafe, and we'll talk about this specific subject for this prescribed amount of time. But that's not how things actually happen, right? We bump into each other in the hallway or over beers and go, oh, that's what I've been missing. I got to run right back and do it. We got done with Startup Weekend. What's the first thing that happened? Ben Milne got on Twitter and said, I got to run back to the office. I'm so excited. So all of us are going to be in there. We're going to be creating our startups. You'll be able to see the things that we're doing, and you can take the good and leave the bad. There will be a number of other people. These are sort of the people that have agreed to be in residence, but there are a number of other people who will be part-time, sort of called part-time faculty, that will be dropping in and have office hours, or they'll be in working with specific startups. And then a number of people, like you saw today, that will be in doing lunch and learns and buying everybody Jimmy John's and talking about patent law, whatever the case may be. Whatever trips your trigger. Talked about competition, and I mentioned that I sort of cast the net widely on what competition looks like. Can you see the colors okay with the light? So there's a number of different dots. There are accelerators, which for lack of a better term are the individuals that are helping startups along, but they don't necessarily have a place to do that in. There are co-working spaces, and then there are incubators, which are sort of the hybrid of accelerator with a space. This map is not my judgment. This is how they advertise themselves as incubators or accelerators and so forth. I've been in a number of these, and the majority of them are empty. Anybody want to take a guess why? Either no one knows about them. Any other guesses? There's nobody. Yeah, there's nobody else in there. Well, that's why they're empty. Yeah. Definition. Thank you. That factually accurate. Any other? There's no momentum, right? There's no culture. Yeah. Yeah. So I do maybe conservatively 10 meetings a week with entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs. I think I'm an entrepreneur, but I don't know quite for sure. Why don't you quit your job and go do this full time? Oh, my spouse won't let me. Or, well, maybe I'm just going to do it part-time until it generates enough money, and then I'll take my foot off my cushy corporate job, and then I'll go do it. And there's a lot of that sort of fear to commit. Ironically, what I've observed here, and this is just my opinion, is startups, when you say startups to people here, usually they recoil. If you're in dinner conversation, what do you do? Oh, I run a startup. They go, oh, really? Like, wow, what's the matter? You couldn't get a real job? What's wrong with you? Well, you got fired. You're unemployed. So you're calling yourself an entrepreneur. I got it. In the Valley, or on the 128 corridor in Boston, or in Raleigh, or in Austin, or any of the other places I've lived or managed teams of people, you didn't go to work for big companies unless you couldn't make it in the startup world. That was a hiding place. That's where you went to go camp out and just crawl your way up the corporate ladder very slowly. So if you're willing to play full contact sports, you go out in the startup world and you risk it. And you make a bunch of bank, and you walk in. Case in point, I've said this once before for Mike. Case in point, I walked into Nordstrom's. Does everybody know what Nordstrom's is? It's a clothier. Walked into Nordstrom's at South Coast Plaza, Orange County, late 90s, and said I need to buy a suit. And I walked in there, I think wearing a pair of slacks, maybe, and a polo shirt. Nobody would wait on me. I couldn't get anybody to sell me a suit. I think we may have talked about this at some point. Because look how he's dressed. He can't afford a suit, right? It took me like an hour to get anybody to work with me, and I ended up buying a suit that was way more expensive because I had to justify that I could afford a suit. It was total reverse psychology. But fast forward about 10 years, I'm living in Northern California in Silicon Valley during the dot-com days. I walked in wearing a pair of ratty jeans, flip-flops, and a T-shirt. And these guys were all over me because they thought I was so wealthy, I didn't care how I dressed. And that I just had money to spare. And it's the same sort of thing here. It's the stigma of, are startups good or bad? Is that a bunch of money waiting Or is that, these guys are risky, or this is a euphemism for unemployed, or whatever it may be? We're going to change that culture, and we're going to do a little bit at a time, and all of you are change agents, and you're all part of that. So consider yourself enlisted. Generally, at this point in time, we're going to whip out a bunch of slides with a bunch of pro formas and financials and things like that. I have those in a business plan. I usually try not to jam that many words on a slide, and I definitely don't ever try to jam that many numbers on a slide because it turns into an eye chart. And Guy Kawasaki's rule from Art of the Start is
10, 20, 30.
10, 20, 30. Go ahead and 10 minutes.
Sorry, 10 slides.
10 slides.
20 minutes, 30-point font.
30-point font. Yeah, the other rule was always take the average age of the people in the room and
Actually, it was take the oldest.
yeah, the oldest person in the room and then half that, and that's the minimum size font. Yeah. So putting numbers on a slide, financial projections, either you're grossly oversimplifying to the point where it's not useful, or it's a eye chart and it's not useful. So have a separate document. I often call this first pitch when you're doing this, first date, and the purpose of the first date is to get a second date. And how you know that you're going to get a second date is, why don't you give me a copy of your business plan or your financial projections? They're asking you, they're closing you, because you've whet their appetite enough to do so. That's the goal of all of this. So less is more with the presentation, but you do need to present some basic things. What's the problem you're solving? How are you going to solve it in a unique way? How are you going to monetize that? Who's the team that's going to do that? Competition, externalities, other factors, exogenous variables that will impact your ability to execute on that brilliant, masterfully conceived plan. Those are the things that you really want to spend the time on, if you can, without slides. Or if you have slides, you have them in your bag and you hand them to them at the end and say, here's a summary of what we spoke about. But at the end of the day, let them steer. You don't steer. Have a conversation. Don't dictate to them. I try like hell, but there was much less interaction here between us than I would prefer. I'd rather sit down and just have one-on-ones with you all. You can attest to that. You can attest to that. I mean, I've had one-on-ones with a number of people in the room. Than present in a group like this, because the amount of value that's exchanged. A number of you might have questions that I didn't answer with the prescribed format that I had. So how useful was that? Versus what specifically do you want to talk about? Let's talk about that. Because I want to answer your questions. Your questions will be different than his questions, or his questions. Speaking of, any questions about Startup City?
What's your business model?
What's the business model?
Yep.
The business model is to take the startups in and take as little money from them as possible. Primarily because we want them to take what meager funds they have, which is usually none, and roll it back into the business and invest in the business. We've got 3 million vacant square feet downtown. The last thing we need to do is be charging people for real estate, especially startups. We have a culture of mentorship and participation in Iowa. Everybody leans forward. I was with Suku Radia this morning. I think he mentors like 20-some people. I don't know where he finds the time. And that's endemic. I mean, everybody is like that. Everybody leans to help somebody else. If you saw a car break down in the middle of an intersection, what do? You get out of your car, you push it through the intersection, right? Try that in California, you get shot. Yeah, probably run over, yeah. So the idea is provide as many of these resources at no charge as we can. Like a traditional incubator, take a little tiny bit of equity from the bottom line in the hopes that one of these startups will become liquid. We can fund that money back into the startup or back into the incubator and then bootstrap it moving forward. The first few years, huge money loser. It's an economic development activity for the city at that point. It probably should be city funded. But is it a private venture? I can tell you, I can write a check for it. That's no problem. It's just I'm going to be turning you upside down by your ankles and shaking every penny out of your pocket to get my money back. And we don't want that for the long-term viability of that in the city. We want everybody to be thinking long-term, regional development, entrepreneurial climate, let 1,000 startups bloom, not get another couple data centers. Sorry if anybody in here works at a data center, but for Startup City, they would be as quickly, actually we've got the model teed up, we've got the infrastructure teed up, we've got a list of over 50 startups who've expressed interest in being part of this. Obviously cannot get all 50 in. If you did, it'd be cacophonous, nobody get anything done. So there'll be a bit of a selection process where we get a subset of those folks. Depending on the timing of funds that come in and the quantity of funds, which we're trying to accelerate as quickly as we can, we could be up and operational by the beginning part of summer with at least 20 startups in there. Or sorry, as many as 20 startups in there. I think that's about max. Beyond that, it gets to be unmanageable for everybody involved. Have not worked with the West Des Moines incubator yet. And that's a grave omission on my part that I haven't reached out to those folks. Tej, I believe you have, and then a couple other people that I work with on a regular basis. It's entirely subjective. There are some objective pieces, which is we have to do a portfolio management component of you can't have overlapping competitive companies too much, primarily because you don't want people going, well, I could talk to you about that, but I got to over here because he's doing something competitive. The culture has got to be very open and participatory, and everybody's got to be sharing at all points. So there's a bit of, if you've ever had a really big dinner party and figuring out who to invite that's not going to piss off everybody else, and when they get drunk, it's really, okay, we got to get all these people sort of quadrant. We have a finite population of people here at different stages of maturity and viability. Not everybody's viable. There are 50 startups that we talked about. I'd say of those, maybe half are viable. And that's viable from the idea, and then it turns into, can they actually execute? And that's what the incubator is there to assist, is to increase their ability to execute. So it's a beauty contest at the end of the day. There's a portfolio management component as far as the sectors, the maturity, the team, and then it's a beauty contest as far as how we get those people in. Also, their current situations. One thing, as I mentioned, because of the culture here of I'm going to hide in a cube until my startup's generating enough money that I can move over there, not realizing that your startup will never generate enough money until you give it that much of your attention. We don't want 50 part-timers. We want people that will actually be in there and create the culture. So we have to watch that component. It's a multivariable equation at the end of the day. Sorry, long answer to a short question. Yeah, it's tricky. A lot of it's professional judgment. I bet you right now if we did the startup weekend crowd and we had everybody pretend like they were a judge for that crowd, say here are the 10 startups, please rank them in order that you think they'll actually be successful, I bet you we'd have a very, very consistent vote. I think everybody there would say, yeah, that's pretty much going to be the winner, and that's pretty much going to be second. After that, it'll probably get a little mushy. But there were some clear contenders.